Hey everyone, it's Amanda Radke back for another episode of the Heart of Rural America podcast, the show where we highlight great people doing inspiring things in their communities to make this country and to make agriculture stronger. Today's guest, I'm very excited to have join us today. I've long been a fan of her work on Instagram with American Unwon. She is one of those people that just keeps a pulse on the issues facing America's farmers and ranchers. She's not playing political games. She's not there to spin things. She's not there with an agenda. She's there to share the truth, however the truth lands. And I respect her so much for that. So please welcome to the show, Keely Covello. Welcome to the Heart of Rural America.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. It's such an honor to be here.
Yeah. So Keely, tell us a little bit about yourself because you've done a lot before American Unwon and you have an impressive resume. So tell people kind of how you landed doing what you're doing today and what the journey was like along the way.
Okay, well, let's see. I grew up very rural in the part of California no one really knows about, up in far northern California. It's kind of infamous for cannabis production these days, so it's really half hippies, half cowboys up there, very much the Wild West. Um, Both my parents were veterinarians, though my mom stopped practicing when I was born and went on to raise 8 kids, so I'm sure her animal wrangling skills came in handy, but my dad was my dad was the local ranch vet. He drove for 3 hours in any direction in his pickup truck with a vet pack and just took care of ranch animals and livestock. So I was always in the truck with him going to work, learned just about everything I ever knew that way, I think. And then when I went to LA for college, it was just like the biggest culture shock possible. I realized my upbringing was very rare, and what I'd learned and believed about the world was really in the minority. So that really impacted me and shaped the journey I chose to take. I'm sure you can relate to that too. As you get out of your small town, you realize you are often one of one in a big city.
Right. So, okay, so you went to LA for college. What did
Yes.
I'm like, what would possess you? Okay, tell us what you did in college.
So I always want to be a writer, but coming from a blue collar community, you need a trade, right? So I decided I was going to be a journalist. So I went to study journalism. I worked at the local paper through college, the Ukiah Daily Journal, and they just gave me a lot of freedom to cover the stories I was interested in. And the story that I think really changed my life was a local rancher friend whose land was being taken in an eminent domain case by the Army Corps of Engineers back in, 2010, something like that. So I wrote about his fight for the paper, and this story was also covered by the Wall Street Journal. And that really blew my mind. I mean, it kind of changed the course of my life to realize that the stories of my community, these small ranching stories, have real national impact. People care about them. And I really have come to see them as bellwethers for freedom in the state of our rights in the country. So in 2012, I went to DC. I went to journalism school there. I was working as an editorial intern at the Washington Times. And when I was there, I think I'd always assumed that I'd want to be a political reporter and that I'd love working in the nation's capital. But I hated it, actually. I hated how disingenuous and stiff my interviews with politicians were. Everyone was very canned and dishonest, I felt. I missed the people I covered back home. And just kind of that honest, wise take, the off-the-cuff interviews. So I felt like I left home and I was looking for the heartbeat of the country in DC. And I realized I'd been living in it all along. It wasn't in DC at all. It was back home. So anyway, long story short, my professor at journalism school, he assigned us each to pick a blog topic. And he had us running these little blogs. This is like when BuzzFeed was kicking off. So it's like, I think the internet is going to be a big thing in journalism. So we need to give you some training.
What year were you out there, by the way?
2012, Obama's second election.
Okay, gotcha. I was in DC in 2008. So I was wondering if we crossed. Yeah, I was on Obama's first kick. So
oh wow. Probably high-fived on your way out.
Interesting time. But yeah, that was my perception of DC too. Like, this place
was
is
it really
awful. I want to go home.
Oh man, I hated it there. I really did. It felt just so, and I think growing up in rural America, you're very patriotic. I was very patriotic growing up. My grandparents are Azorean immigrants, and they were always like, "We're not going to teach you Portuguese. You're an American. Be an American." So I grew up so proud to be an American. I was excited to go to DC and see what all happened, and it was a very disillusioning experience for sure.
Yes.
But I'm glad I had that young at the start of my career. I think that's a good thing to know. So, anyways, I was assigned to write a blog, and we were to just aggregate news, get Google alerts, the whole thing. So I was feeling homesick and a little defiant at this point, and I decided I was going to cover ranching in my blog. And my professor told me this was a terrible idea. There would not be enough news to cover. It was just not going to be a successful project. And I just said, wait and see. So at the end of the semester, he called me into his office and he admitted he was wrong. He said, that was the best, most successful blog our program has ever had. I had no idea how many stories there are in rural America, how much news there is in agriculture. And this is a nationally syndicated columnist. He was a very respected career journalist. And it blew my mind that he was shocked by the news that really impacts half this country. It really impacts this entire country, right? So I left DC knowing I learned something really important. They have no idea what's going on in real rural America. And I felt that I never wanted to go back and cover their news. I wanted to go home and cover ours and make them pay attention however I could. So anyhow, long story short, worked in marketing for several years, started my business. I started working in film. I was always trying to imagine how I could get back to what I truly wanted to do and felt was my calling. And finally, I just launched Unwon as like a personal side project. Started aggregating weekly rural news and writing stories that impact rural America. And it's been steadily growing since. I got into a documentary film space. I was accepted to the Palladium Incubator this year, which is run by Michael Pack, who was Trump's appointee to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So I'm working right now on a film about a murder of a rancher in Northern California. And I had to go back to DC for that program. And it was a really cool moment to be back in the city, kind of on these terms, telling the stories I wanted them to hear. So God is good. I think we're just getting started, but I'm so excited to kind of be back in this space from the standpoint of speaking for rural America, not just to them and at them.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have to pause before we talk about Unwon. Tell me about this murder. What's the premise of it?
Yeah, so it happened up where I grew up in rural Northern California, where there is a huge cannabis problem. And what I've discovered is that this is kind of an open secret, but there are a lot of cartels in our national forests right now who are operating massive cannabis farms, black market cannabis farms, and they're having run-ins with people who have grazing leases in the national forest, ranchers who are just trying to take care of their cattle and get to work. And it's really become quite scary and a really, really tense situation. So this elderly rancher, 85 years old, named Dick Drury, very beloved by his community. His family's been ranching there since the 1860s. He was found with a gunshot wound to the head in his car on a very remote road in Humboldt County. Wow. And so it's been assumed for 3 years since it happened that it was a cartel hit, which really tells you about the culture up there, that would be the immediate assumption. Looking into it a little closer, I don't think it was a cartel hit. I think it was a neighbor who's growing cannabis, and I think it was a water dispute, which really highlights in California how, as the government continues to crack down on us and really impose a lot of water restrictions, this is going to become more of an issue because you have really bad actors who they're also allowing into the state, who are being forced to have these confrontations with Americans who are just trying to do their job and feed us. And so I think it's a big story that's only going to get bigger. I think there's something like 6,000 illegal grows in our national forests across the U.S. It's happening in Montana, Colorado. Wow. I talked to a sheriff who said there are massive industrial-sized farms in Del Norte and Trinity counties in Northern California that are run by the Chinese. So the Chinese have really taken over the illicit cannabis industry in Northern California. So it's a really shocking story. No one's talking about it. And I saw a lot of people up there in filming the doc who are just terrified and they don't really want to talk, and they feel like they are living in this culture of fear where they don't expect help, and they don't want to talk about what's going on. So it's a big story with a lot of far-reaching impacts, but ultimately we just felt that this rancher deserved justice, and 85 years old, just a pillar of his community, and another one of those kind of forgotten Americans that the government has allowed this to happen to, and doesn't care enough about to even ensure justice in this case.
Unreal. And so
Yeah.
you're a young, like, good-looking gal going into this very, like, scary situation. Like, how do you navigate through that interviewing people that are in a fearful state and, like, I guess, what's your approach to all of that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I felt like we had a great team. The guys on our team were, um, all really good people. We really trusted each other. The sheriffs up there are amazing people. Billy Hansel in Humboldt and Sheriff Matt Kendall in Mendocino both really had our back. Matt Kendall was calling me every day to make sure I was okay. He, did a personal tour, took us around some of the sketchier areas and made sure we were safe. But ultimately, I think that's what journalism should be. You should be going to the tough places and asking the hard questions. So I can't really say that I'm a journalist if I'm not willing to do that.
Right.
I think God will protect us and keep us safe. Most people don't want to hurt anyone with a camera, so I don't have an overinflated view of my importance or danger in those situations. But you definitely have to be smart. And up there, I would say I don't think people have realized how dangerous it's gotten, and our open border has made it a lot worse. So I think these stories will come out more in the years to come, but it has to be told. It just has to be. Somebody has to go tell this story because it's impacting all of us there's a ton of environmental impact up there. It's really horrific, and it's being just allowed by our government, especially here in California. So I did feel like it kind of had to be told, and if no one else is going to tell it, it would have to be my sister and I. So
Amazing. So
God kept us safe.
when do you think the documentary will come out?
It should be out in September, along with
Okay.
a few others in this incubator. Yeah, yeah. I'll have
Awesome.
to.
Can't wait to see it, and, yeah, I hope by shining the light on that, it improves the situation because that's the only thing. It's like darkness can fester when it doesn't have the light, so amazing to you
Exactly.
for going into that space and trying to tell that story, which I guess that segues to what you're doing now with American Unwon. How did you name it? What does that mean to you?
Oh, great question. So the name kind of comes from this idea I had that America is not one, the West isn't one. There's still frontier here, there are still opportunities and possibilities. I think the media lies about this because they never leave big urban centers, so they frankly don't know. And I just felt, I spoke earlier about LA being a culture shock. And I think one of the biggest culture shocks was young people no longer have heroes. They're very disillusioned and uninspired.
Mhm.
And I never felt that way as a kid. I don't know if you had a
Right.
similar experience, but I just, yeah, I felt like the blue collar Americans I grew up with were so impressive and inspirational and resilient. And I felt so inspired as a kid that if I was just brave and worked hard, I could really do anything.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I had shared on Instagram the other day, like, my heroes are all cowboys, but it's like,
Yeah,
that's because they still have that, like, grit and determination, and they're not afraid of hard life or challenges or labor, but, yeah, these are giants that walk amongst us that haven't been domesticated yet, like, they're independent and rugged, and, yeah, anything is possible if you just, like, go for it, and, yeah, so
I love
you don't
that.
realize that until you travel, that is a rare that
Exactly.
people don't always have those heroes to look up to and to try to fill those big shoes.
Right. And we need that, right? You can't expect our country to flourish without myths and heroes and positive stories. There's so much hatred to this country. And I think I always felt that if my friends in LA could know the people I grew up with, they would not feel that way about this country. They would
Right.
feel so inspired, and it's a very diverse. Rural America is diverse. There's not one personality type. There's not one type of job. And I think of all the little boys especially, but girls too, growing up in school who are told, you get to work an office job and this is your only way to success. You have to go to college, you have to do this. And that's not true. There are so many paths to opportunity. And I just wanted to highlight that and show that, America isn't one, the West isn't one. There's still so much opportunity out there. So that's kind of where that came from. And then it's grown into a lot of news reporting, which I think also shows that our country isn't one because the people don't really control a lot of what goes on in this country. So we have a lot of work to do for this next generation.
Absolutely. So you guys need to know I connected with Keely because she actually cared about what was going on in South Dakota with this carbon sequestration project and this pipeline being shoved down our throats, really because of California and these emission standards that the politicians in South Dakota figured they can enrich themselves with if we grab these 45Q tax credits and we get into these carbon markets. And repeatedly we say, well, why on earth would we want to dictate the future of our corn farming based on the metrics of liberals in California who you'll never be green enough for them? They'll always change the benchmarks, but yet it is talking about America Unwon. It's like the gold rush right now of people wanting to make money off the Green New Deal, and they're willing to take their neighbor's land and do it. So I guess my question to you is, well, thank you for caring about our story. I mean, I'll link the articles that she wrote about our fight going on in South Dakota. But what is going on in California? Like, are the farmers and ranchers okay there, or like, what is the tone? Because I mean, California, you're in the news always. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't putting me in the position of answering for this state. I don't know that I want to do that. No, it is really sad. It's very troubling. I did a documentary last year about ranching in California. We went up and down and talked to ranchers across the state, and they're really up against it. And it's sad to see that. It's sad to see these cities kind of having an outsized impact on rural California. Really, the Bay Area and LA area control the state. And I mean, side note, but this is why you want an electoral college, right? Because when you drown out the voices of the people who take care of all of your land and resources and who feed you and who keep you clothed and who transport your needs to you, you're in for a world of hurt. You don't want to ignore those people's voices and their needs. And
okay.
California is a really good picture of what happens when you don't have an electoral college. You really do have mob rule. And they are phasing out a lot of the agriculture in the state. And I think people forget that California, before it was Hollywood and before it was Silicon Valley, is an ag state at heart. There is a rich agricultural history in this state. My Azorean immigrant grandparents came here to the Central Valley with many other immigrants who came here in the 1800s, early 1900s, Basque people, Spanish people, Dutch people who came to grow food and to achieve the American dream through agriculture. But they face water curtailments. If you drive up I-5, you'll see tons of signs to Gavin Newsom about giving them back their water because they just feel like they have no voice. And that's just one of many issues that they face. So yeah, it's really sad to see what's happening. I don't know that it will change anytime soon. I don't know that people in the cities realize what's going on. I think it's really easy to demonize their neighbors, and we're seeing this. One of the stories I'm covering, Measure J in Sonoma County, the factory farm ban, as it's called, but it's really just a farm ban. That's an example of these constant attacks on agriculture in the state.
So let's talk about that. I mean, I could go down so many directions of what California has done to attack farmers and ranchers. I feel like we could have like hours of content, and just a few that popped up into my head. You mentioned the water thing. Like, what an affront to your food supply when you guys had those massive rains, and then there's no infrastructure to collect the water, and people are literally in a drought and they can't grow food, and you're watching all that water just go into the ocean. Like, I would lose my mind. Like, if I had lived there, I don't think I could have handled it. Or like the wildfires, the massive wildfires, and then it's like, okay, well, look at what they've done to allow cattle to graze or not. And
Mhm.
you're not allowing timber or any of these things that would help curtail wildfire fires to spread. It's like, do you think it's intentional? Like, do these people want to starve, or do they want control over the land, or what is it?
We were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier. I don't know exactly what the motive is for some of these people. I don't know that I want to speculate, but I think at its heart, there's just a total disrespect for rural working Americans and what they do. There's a lot of hubris in thinking that you can fix the climate if you will just erase the people who make your food. I mean, it's a lot of pride, it's a lot of arrogance, it's a total disconnect from the realities of life. You think that your carbon footprint is lighter than the farmer who feeds you and who provides your water, your power, your beautiful green spaces that you drive by and take for granted that are only there because somebody is giving up a lot of money to sell to a developer to just graze cows on that green pasture, but you think they're the environmental problem. It's
Mhm.
just really arrogant. There's a huge disconnect from um, rural Americans and urban Americans. I think that's honestly one of the biggest divides in our country right now. It's just rural and urban Americans. And no one talks about that, but that is truly at the heart of a lot of the division in this country. The good news is, I think when you talk to normal urban or suburban people, they want to hear these stories. They want to be connected to farmers and ranchers. I just
Mhm.
saw farmers have something like 80% trust or approval rating in the United States. People love and trust their farmers, which is why I think the media and politicians have to do their best to paint agriculture, big ag, as the problem. They don't want to call out farmers and ranchers because they know that won't go over well. So there's a lot of common ground that you can have when you tell these stories, but the media is very invested in never letting those stories come to light, and in painting, rural America with this broad brush, which is why we have to start telling our own stories and speaking up for ourselves because they're not going to listen to us. I think it's much easier to scapegoat a rancher um, and their beef production as the problem in the climate. And meanwhile, I live here in Orange County now. I'm next to an airport with a whole lot of private jets flying in and out, but it's always the rancher in Central Valley who is really the problem. It's just very shocking. It's a ton of hubris. And I mean, one more thing, the dams being taken out in Northern California right now are a perfect example of this. They are destroying communities in Klamath County. They're about to destroy Mendocino County, where I grew up, by taking out these hydroelectric dams in an era where we're supposedly all about green power. They're taking out hydroelectric dams, water storage, water resources for entire agricultural communities, and they're doing that in the name of progress, in the name of fish habitat. Meanwhile, nobody has great habitat when we have these devastating million-acre wildfires. It's just really horrific and anti-science, anti-common sense. So, yeah, long story short, I can't imagine what the motive would be other than just kind of a baseline dislike of rural America and kind of the idea that you know so much that you can ignore all the common sense of your ancestors and of the people who actually feed you and provide for you, and you can make the world better just by sheer willpower and maybe a couple of studies that you read.
Oh, right, I know it, and sometimes I mean, the faith part of me kicks in, and sometimes I feel like this is so anti-God in nature of, like, thinking that having the arrogance that we can control God's design through, like, a wind turbine or a carbon pipeline or some kind of emission reduction thing, like, the arrogance that we think we're gonna be able to change the Earth's temperature or whatever it is, and I think the people on that side aren't even advocating for that anymore, but to me, it's like a control mechanism, but also it's like, humans are emissions, like, we are life, and the only way we become net zero is if we're dead, I guess, and so to me, it's just very anti-human at the core, and I really struggle with that when it becomes almost a religion of sorts that people are pursuing these things.
I think that's really at the heart of it. I think you just nailed it. I think it's anti-human because it's ultimately anti-God. They don't see human beings as positive for the environment anymore and positive for nature, even though God made us to steward nature. We're part of nature. Landscapes and land are better with proper human management. That's a shocking statement in this day and age where we assume
Right.
that wilderness and the absence of people is a better alternative. So I think you're 100% right. Ultimately, it's a spiritual war, and it's this anti human mindset that wants to reduce human impact, which is very anti God and anti his design. So, yeah, I think you're totally right, Amanda.
So let's
Sadly.
Yeah, I know, I know. So let's go back to this Measure J. There's a lot of
Yeah.
attacks on agriculture in California. What's going on in Sonoma County?
So, Measure J is a ballot initiative that will be on the ballot in November. It's designed to ban CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, which, as you know, is an environmental term. It's not a term that has anything to do with animal welfare or the amount of space that an animal has. It really shouldn't be used as a moral term or even a negative label. It's something that describes a farm that could impact watershed.
Sure.
So, but it's being used. The term factory farm doesn't have a definition. It's just a scare term that people react to. So this animal rights group collected signatures by using photos of dead animals and standing outside of grocery stores and harassing people into signing their petition to get this ballot on, or get this initiative on the ballot. But in reality, they were very misled. I've even had people commenting on videos I've shared, like, I signed that petition. I had no idea. I thought this was about something else. I thought this was about animal abuse. It's not.
Mhm.
And
Of
when you
course.
look into the group, right, when you look into the group behind it, they're based out of Berkeley, and they openly state they want to criminalize meat eating. They want to arrest and criminalize people who eat meat and dairy, and they openly state they want to end animal agriculture in the US by 2040. So they're not just looking out for animals. They're also a group that there was a new California report that came out very recently that found that they could have been intentionally behind an avian flu outbreak that happened in Sonoma County last fall. They could have actually, activists from this group may have been the ones who intentionally spread avian flu, which resulted in, I think, 250,000 chicken and ducks being culled.
Wow.
So they're bad actors. They have bad motivations. And when they're coming after CAFOs and they're saying it's for the environment and alternatively for animal welfare, really they're just coming after farming. I've gotten to know some of the farmers who would be impacted, like the Trush family. Um, they've run their dairy for decades. They're wonderful people. They have a beautiful operation. They were the second dairy in the Western US to go organic, and they'll be shut down if this ballot passes. So
Wow.
it's just stuff like that when Californians have to deal with attacks from, people in Berkeley. They have to guard their farms from these activists coming on and causing trouble. There was a barn fire recently, a couple weeks ago. Um, and there were some activists from this group who were magically very on hand to comment to the media as this fire was going on. So, not
Wow.
saying anything definitely happened, but they were there at the right time, and they've been known to agitate in the past. So it's really scary that you can have a group like this upend an entire community and an entire industry just by misleading the public. And they've said if this ballot is successful, they're going to duplicate these efforts across the U.S. So
Wow.
it's going to stretch out past California. It's something people should really be aware of because the impact could be really huge. And farmers and ranchers don't deserve to be harassed like this by extremist groups. So
Right.
anyway,
And
it's
well,
a
and
it's a scary situation.
that's what these activists do is they set a precedent in one spot where it's like an easy slam dunk, and then they use that to go to other areas. And so, like when you look up
Exactly.
the Measure J or on their website, like who would vote not against, or like who would disagree with this? It
Right.
says vote yes to protect animals, vote yes to protect public health, vote yes to protect our environment, and yes to protect small farms. So, what are you seeing farmers doing to kind of balance out this narrative? Or are they, I mean, they're sitting ducks, their backs against the wall. Their dream could be over by November. What are they doing there?
I know it's really scary. I know Sonoma County Farm Bureau is doing everything they can. They've started to fight back, but it's tough because these activists, I don't know how they make money. I don't know how they feed themselves, but farmers have a lot of work to do. They're busy most of the time. So to just have to interrupt your very packed schedule and packed life to now have to battle back against someone who wants to end your way of life and kind of form an existential threat to your job and your livelihood, it's really egregious. Which is why I think I loved watching what you did in South Dakota and how you used your voice to make a small local issue a national issue. Because, like I said before, I really think these cases that farmers and ranchers run into are often the bellwether for freedom and individual rights across the country. So I think that we can use social media as a positive to really bring rural Americans together over issues like this. I think that in the isolated case of a Measure J or a carbon pipeline, we might have a small voice, but when you utilize the larger rural America to fight for these issues and to lend their voices, it can be really powerful. So they've definitely gained a lot of traction online. People who care about farmers and who see the truth of this and who've been speaking out for them. I know the Trush family has been fighting back. Some local news reports have been covering it really fairly, because this really is an egregious bill and most people are against it. Even I think the entire Sonoma County Board of Supervisors opposes Measure J, but they're just forced to put it on the ballot because of local ordinances. So there is some, vocalization, and people are fighting back. But you're right. I wonder how this will be worded on the ballot, because we all know that, how things are worded and the name of a bill doesn't necessarily speak to what its impact will be. So it'll be interesting to see how that ends up on the Sonoma County ballot in November.
Yeah, I guess one thing I've learned through our South Dakota fight that's still ongoing, and we have much ahead,
Right, right.
but reclaiming community of like
Yes.
locking arms with people. Like I myself can't make a difference. My neighbor can't do much together, but or like on their own, but like if
Right.
we're all united and it's crazy because we come from different walks of life, even from different
Mhm.
sides of the political aisle, and yet in agreement, everyone's like, it's not happening here. It's not happening in our rural state of South Dakota. I'm not letting these bullies take over my neighbor's land or my land. And so we're just going to stand together. And the wild thing is even though all the power and the money is on the other side, it's really hard to suppress a group of people that just never quit. And they're at the county commission meetings. They're testifying. They're talking to the media. And yeah, I guess that's my advice to anyone facing this is you find out who your friends and neighbors are, have a potluck, invite everybody over, get everybody on the same page, speaking the same language, and take care of each other because there's no white knight coming to save you. It's got to be you. And that's even as I look at the presidential election, it's like, oh man, it's aggravating. We just got done with the debate and you've been providing awesome commentary on it. But yet at the end of the day, I'm like, if Trump comes back in office, he's not going to save my neighbors from a eminent domain situation. It's got to be us. And so on a local level, on a state level, it has to be we the people. And I think we get the government we deserve. And freedom is messy, and you have to fight for it. And so that's why I appreciate so much what you're doing and the message that you're putting out there. So Keely, I feel like we could talk about a million different things, but I want to close the show. We've got about 5 minutes. Tell me about Ranch Visions, this new company that you've launched and the project you're working and how it can help producers like myself and so many of the listeners on this show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for asking. Ranch Vision is the sponsor of Unwon, and I think it's really the perfect sponsor for it because it shares that mission of making rural Americans more resilient and empowered in this day and age, especially in the grazing industry in Ranch Vision's case. So Ranch Vision is my dad's project. He truly is the smartest person I've ever met. I've traveled quite a bit now. I've worked in a lot of industries, and that remains the case. He's
Yeah.
and he really loves agriculture. So that's his world. So I love that my childhood vision of my dad as the smartest person remains true for me.
Yeah, that's so great.
He's really a special guy, and he really loves ranching and ranch people. And so he's he's kind of the unofficial, reluctant social media star of Unwon as well. I had him film a couple videos answering people's questions when I was home a few months ago, and now he's like the only person anyone wants to hear from, which is fair. I get it. I wouldn't want to hear from you.
Please tell him to keep coming because I love it. It's entertaining and informative, and he's like, he's doing a great job.
I'll tell him you said that.
Yeah.
He'll be happy to hear that. He's like, "What are you doing? Why am I on Instagram? I didn't sign up for this."
People love you.
Yeah, exactly. So he's been a vet and a ranch management consultant for over 30 years, 37 years, I think. And he really saw most of his clients don't know the future of their ranch operations and they can't predict their profits because of the complexities of the ranching business. You just have so many interrelated variables. They're all so challenging to parse and then kind of make predictions from. So he developed a massive equation that essentially will find a rancher's profits and generate a bunch of different reports that ranchers have never had access to before. So we built out a software team and made Ranch Vision, which is kind of the product of his ranch management consulting practices and concepts for 30 years now, into a very powerful program that anyone can easily use on their own. And it's been about 3 years developing that. We finally launched about a month ago. The results have been really incredible. Ranchers can input, basic facts about their ranch operation, cattle, sheep, and or goats. and generate reports and data to guide their management decisions. So it really lets you see the big picture of what's happening on the ranch and tweak their management. So we have videos on our website of ranchers finding ways to grow their profits this year by like 60%, 80%. It does require record keeping. It's really easy to use. It's really beautifully designed. And it's, yeah, a powerful business tool for ranchers. So the goal is really to help ranchers get more resilient and more profitable. It's currently the only presenting sponsor of Unwon, so I use the time I would kind of normally use marketing through paid ads and everything else to really provide a service to my readers, and hopefully they can also learn about Ranch Vision as the sponsor in the process, because I do think they really have similar goals of just empowering American producers, American individuals. So yeah, that's a little overview of Ranch Vision.
Cool. And right now you guys have you can save 25% on your subscription. So there's different tiers depending on how many head you want to manage. But would you say is this for a basic commercial operation looking at inputs? Could a seed stock, like a purebred guy wanting to track registered cattle, like what kind of inputs can you put into the software to track?
You should have my dad on to speak about all of the ins and outs of it. I think he would be a great guest,
Okay.
and he's a lot of fun.
Round
But
two.
yeah, round two, just to make a suggestion there. But yeah, it's really for any size commercial operation, cattle, sheep, or goats, a grazing operation where the main output is meat typically, or mohair or wool in the case of goats and sheep. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I'll provide the links in the show notes, and if
Well,
guys
thank
want
you.
to check it out, that will all be there for you. And of course, Keely can answer your questions too. So, Keely, I guess to close out the show, any parting words, and then I guess tell everybody where they can follow you so they can keep in touch down the road.
Well, I would just say thank you, Amanda. You're kind of the leader in this space. I feel like you've been one of the first voices to use social media for agriculture. You're a huge inspiration for me. So really appreciate you having me on. Thank you for using your journalism and your voice this way. It's I think you have more of an impact than you know. So I just appreciate talking with you today, and congrats again on South Dakota, and I'll be tracking your fight through November. I know you've got a long road ahead, but you got this. Knowing Amanda, you got this.
Yeah, they might have messed with the wrong
I think
cattleman.
they did. I think they picked the wrong person. Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
so. But I guess just likewise, I appreciate your voice and your commentary and just highlighting the stories that aren't being told otherwise. And you do it in a very professional way that without a slant. It's providing the news and giving people a fair shake to actually see what's going on. So American Unwon is where they can see it on Instagram. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, they can America Unwon, UNWON.com, America Unwon on Instagram, all over the place. But those are the two main spots. We're starting up a YouTube channel. We'll see how
Oh,
that goes.
great.
We'll try that out. But yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. I
Yes,
appreciate you.
and one more question for you because I
Yes,
said we didn't have time to talk about it, but you have a documentary out, you just can't see them from the road. Can people
yes.
watch that anywhere or where can folks check that out?
So that's the one about West Coast ranchers I was talking about earlier. It's currently in film festivals, which has been really cool. It's cool to see it show up in some of these film festivals I never thought we would get in and have some really good
Wow.
conversations about ranching. But I think it'll be out later in the year. The executive producer wants it to go through a few more festivals, but if people follow Unwine, I'll be sure to keep them updated on where they can watch that.
Awesome. And there is a trailer. I'll link to that again. But the website again is americaunone.com. So thank you so much, Keely, and I hope to meet you on the Dusty Trail sometime soon.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Amanda. Really nice talking with you.